What would you say are the more prominent excesses or abuses that go on in the police forces in Mexico? So you have corruption, torture, extrajudicial killing, excessive use of force. If you could just kind of elaborate on what are the main real abuses that are going on in Mexico.
Okay, and I think it also depends on the different forces. So I would say overall, I mean, certainly corruption is a broad spread problem, and that would be more of a criminal offense. But if you're looking at human rights violations, one is arbitrary detentions, which are very commonplace in terms of Mexico's police interaction with population, the automatic response of detaining someone instead of perhaps detaining someone that's not responsible for a crime, but certainly detaining them and almost looking for a way later to justify that detention. And this is linked to torture, and I think it's important. Obviously torture is a widespread problem in Mexico. If you look at the UN Rapporteur on Torture's report that he issued 2 months ago, I would say that torture is widespread in Mexico and practiced by security forces at all levels, meaning the military, the federal police, the state police, the municipal police. I think it's particularly an issue with the investigative police, which are the police within the state and federal attorney general's offices, because they are the ones in general charged to investigate crimes and have more of an incentive to arbitrarily detain someone and torture them into either providing them with evidence or providing them with a forced confession about their participation in a crime as the main and a lot of times only evidence that's ever presented in criminal procedures. So I think that is certainly a broader problem in all forces in Mexico, even in states that you wouldn't think as being, they're not in the spotlight right now in terms of human rights concerns in Mexico. For example, Yucatan. There is a concern, there have been documented cases of torture in Yucatan. In Chiapas, when we were down there last year, cases of municipal police torturing indigenous people in San Cristóbal de las Casas. So it continues to happen. I think excessive use of force is related to that, and certainly the fact that in general Mexican police are not trained adequately on how do you have use of force in terms of when you're detaining someone, but also how do you, what's the appropriate use of force in protest situations. And there's been multiple accounts in the past few years of police at all levels opening fire on protesters, including the Ayotzinapa students, actually in 2011, in one protest where the federal police and the state police opened fire on the students and ended up killing 2 of the students. There was a case last year in the state of Puebla where police fired tear gas canisters into a crowd and actually killed a 13-year-old boy who was hit by one of the canisters. So I think there's a lot of concern about excessive use of force within Mexico's police forces. Extortion continues to be, I think, a widespread problem. Something that we've documented and a lot of organizations and shelters in Mexico that work with migrants have documented is the fact that the federal police, because they are also charged in working with Mexico's Immigration Institute in enforcing immigration law, are also in many cases linked to extorting migrants that they are interacting with in checkpoints or otherwise in Mexico, and basically telling the migrants to give them all the money they have or a certain amount of money, and if they don't pay up, the agents have threatened the migrants to turn them over to the Immigration Institute to be deported. So lots of concerns about extortion, and obviously extrajudicial executions, which there's, I would say, probably less in terms of numbers, but certainly in one of you would put in the category of grave human rights violations. So there have been documented cases in Mexico City where police opened fire on these young people traveling in a vehicle. There was a case that still needs to be fully investigated in Michoacan that happened in January, where new video footage and reporting is coming out saying that federal police actually executed up to 16 people that were part of the rural police that had been created there. So I think there's a lot of concern about both police committing more common crime in terms of extortion or corruption, to them being involved in, again, what you would consider more grave human rights violations. And I think this goes back to the fact that there really are very few exceptions to where you can say that a police agent has actually been effectively investigated and prosecuted for particularly for human rights violations. I think there have been some probably more progress made on investigating agents involved in corruption or kidnapping rings or other high-profile crimes. But when you're talking about human rights violations, I can say torture, for example, there have been 5 federal convictions of torture since 2005. So kind of gives you a sense of very little really done to investigate the wrongdoing, which I think also sends the signal of permissiveness of this if you're not really showing through cases, concrete cases, that you are taking police abuse seriously.